Okay, let's start on Unit 6 for development. And just to kind of give you guys an idea of where we're going, Unit 7 is kind of just a repeat of the very beginning of class. So we are coming to the end of the units that you will need to know for the test. From now on, the rest of my sessions will be kind of prepping for free response questions. All right, so let's start with Unit 6. We're going to talk about development. This is a really big unit. It's going to take us probably 3-ish videos to get through. It is also one I highly expect will be on the test. So if you guys are using your AP Classroom, right, they have been marking free response questions that could be on the test, that or ones that they suggest you look at. They're not going to be on the test, but suggest you look at. And development is kind of some of the ones that they've been highlighting. So let's spend a bunch of time and make sure you're really learning this material. All right, so let's start with economic systems, and I apologize for the bad fuzziness of the screen. So that's not you, that's me. All right, if we talk about economic systems, right, and this plays a big part in development because some places don't develop, in part because of their economic systems. But there's three main kinds, right? Capitalism, socialism, and communism. Capitalism we are really familiar with, and that's what we do, right? It's an economic system where it's private ownership. The means of production, so the raw materials coming in are privately owned. The companies that make the stuff are privately owned. The companies that sell the stuff are privately owned. It is a market-driven system. So, what people buy, how much they're willing to spend is what drives the market. Right? If you put a product out there and nobody likes it, your product will no longer be produced. If you put a product out there and everybody loves it, right, you're going to produce more, and perhaps you can even raise the price. Right? So it's a market-driven system. It is the most common economic system in the entire world. Right? Every core country is a capitalist country. Right? And there are inherent problems about that. Right? We know that there are it really drives a lot of the economic inequality in the world. Right? You have people who are really, really wealthy, right, and people who are really, really not. So capitalism it is good because people decide what it is they want. The government isn't telling you that, but at the same time, right, it makes for super inequality in wealth. Socialism is a little different. It's kind of halfway between capitalism and communism. Right? It is both an economic and a political system. Right? So a socialist government tends to be more of a caretaker. Right? They are the ones that provide things for the people that are in their system. Right? So you have governments that, if we look at a lot of the European governments, right, we see payments for being on maternity leave, payments for people that put their kids through school or medical care. Right? We often hear from the American perspective about healthcare being a socialist deal if the government provides it. Right? So there is private business. It is heavily regulated by the government. The government owns some means of production. Publicly and privately, other people own it. The decisions are made still in the marketplace, right? Private business and consumers drive the market, but there's a lot more government involvement, right? So we will decide what kind of healthcare system we want to have. We will decide, kind of what products might be available and products that won't be. Right? Typically high taxes in a socialist system because you're paying for a lot of government intervention. Let's look at communism. All right, communism is the ultimate end of socialism. Right? We have no real private ownership. Everything's owned by the government. Right? It too is an economic and a political system. The central government owns everything. They own the raw materials, they own the factories, and they decide what is going to be out there and how much it's going to cost. It's sometimes called a command economy because it is in the command of the government. Most communist systems have not been very successful. The Soviet Union famously collapsed in 1991, in part because economically it could not support itself. The Soviet Union was often unable to produce basic goods because they didn't have the basic raw materials in some respects. Right? We only really have two true communist systems in effect, North Korea and Cuba. Cuba is kind of moving somewhat out of it because once the Soviet Union collapsed, their source of funds, which was the Soviet government, kind of fell apart with it. And we know stories about North Korea, right? How their children are suffering, and people suffer from malnutrition because of the inability of the government to do things. Capitalism, most successful. Socialism, in some places it's doing great. Communism, not so successful. All right, let's look at the next one. Right, if we're going to talk about development, right, we often want to talk about site and situation. So we're going to spend a little time with some vocabulary. Site and situation are geographic factors that do contribute to the development of countries and of cities. Right? So if we're looking at cities and we talk about the site of a city, so let's use Chicago as our example because we've used them in the past. Right? A site is its absolute location, and that's part of a site. But why do people pick that site? Right? They often pick it because of the location. Right? It's not just longitude and latitude, and that's the end of it. But why is this location so important? Right? Is it a port city? We know those are great sites because a lot of times that will aid in the development of a city. Right? Is it a good defensible one? Rome was founded on 7 hills, right? Because if you're up higher, you can see your enemies coming, makes it better defensible. Is it close to places that are important to us? You see religion, right? Do I want to have a city that's close to Mecca if Mecca is a place that I want to visit? Or look at Timbuktu that we looked at earlier, a couple of chapters back, being on the river, on the Niger River, plus right at the edge of the Sahara, makes it a great place for trade, or at least it did at that time. Right? Site doesn't change. What does change is the situation, right? If we're looking at Chicago, right, it has an absolute location sitting on Lake Michigan, right? And its relative location for a while was a center of trade for land-based, right? It was a hub for railroads. It was an area for a lot of stockyards, right? So a lot of beef industry there as well. So people would, get goods from Chicago and then also from goods that would come over Lake Michigan. When the St. Lawrence Seaway was opened up and now the Great Lakes are connected and we are now connected to the Atlantic, right, the situation for Chicago changed, right? It is no longer just a hub for the Midwest and areas around Lake Michigan. It's now an important city for Atlantic trade, right? So its situation became, yay, we're a great Midwest city, now we're a world city, right? So the situation often can be very pivotal in whether a place is going to develop. So Chicago develops bigger. For Timbuktu, when sea-based travel became the way that people were trading and not land-based, right, it lost a lot of its situation, right? It wasn't as important to the region and the world around it. All right, let's look at agglomeration. Agglomeration we've talked a little bit about, and this has to do with industry, right? We talked about chickens and hogs in our chapter on development. And agglomeration is defined as a clustering of similar or related firms that are close together, right, that support each other. So let's go to Detroit. Henry Ford brings his assembly line and his automobile industry to Detroit. And as it develops there and becomes more and more important, we see more and more companies will go to Detroit. So you have glass manufacturers and tire manufacturers and other parts that might go in a car that can be made there, and then they are close together to the automobile industry. Henry Ford's company benefits from that, right? Because now we are, he doesn't have as much transportation costs, and he benefits from having all of those supplies nearby. So they are time-wise, they're a lot easier to get to, right? But now we know that other automobile companies open up in Detroit. So you have General Motors, you've got, no idea, Chevrolet. I think they're part of General Motors. Anyway, they go there too because now they're going to benefit, right? They're going to benefit from having all of those supplies there. It makes their costs go down, right? So you have agglomeration, a glob of firms coming together in one area. If we were to have done the next chapter in our book, we would have talked about the furniture industry in North Carolina. They put furniture industry in North Carolina because they're close to the wood, right? They're close to woods that they can use to cut down in a forest industry. But now you see upholstery companies and fabric companies that are there as well, because they will go to where their market is, right? Much like we talked about with hogs and chickens. Deglomeration, right, is because at some point in time it probably becomes too crowded. It becomes too popular, right? We know that if companies, areas, cities start to develop, they're going to start charging more for stuff, and people might leave and go somewhere else. We saw that in the Rust Belt area of the Northeast, that there were so many steel companies and factories in that area that prices started to go up and people started to send it elsewhere, right? Especially if you look at labor, right? If there are 5 companies vying for a labor pool, the company that pays the most money is going to get the labor. And if everybody has to start increasing their cost for labor, it may get too expensive, and I'm going to go look somewhere else to find where I'm going to get my labor, right, and outsource it. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about in this video is the Industrial Revolution, right? The Industrial Revolution happens in the late 1800s, early 1900s, right? It is a period of great innovation. We are seeing all kinds of things being invented that are going to help us become a better manufacturing country and world, right? The steam engine helps us move faster, right? Not only are we able to buy more products, but also we can ship them to places all around the world. We can also move people, right? We can move people with the railroads and what have you, right? We have greater labor pools as people are coming, particularly to places like Western Europe and the United States, where there are many factories, and we can have greater amounts of labor and people are more at work. The Industrial Revolution put an end to what we call cottage industries that were done like in cottages. As an example, an agricultural village would have farming done all season, and then in the winter, people would like take the wool from the sheep and would make sweaters and clothing that they would then sell to supplement their income. They were done literally in cottages. The Industrial Revolution made products faster. We could make them faster, we could make them cheaper, and make them more readily available and more consistent. Right? They all looked the same as opposed to those little imperfections you get when you make stuff at home. All right, we're going to move on to the next video, so hang on for a little bit.